Hi, this is Eternal King here bringing you another LOR video today. So let's examine some more interesting deck archetypes, which is, a very normal thing that we do on this channel regularly. We continually re-examine and examine powerful archetypes in the internal setting to see if we can either squeeze more value out of them or whether there's some sort of prolonged viability to those deck archetypes. So we talked about the meta, we talked about how to know if your deck is competitive, and we talked about, how to top 100. Now let's talk about making memes good. How do you make a bad deck good in Eternal? We talked about upgrading standard decks, which again is a relatively straightforward process, but it can be more complicated to take a meme concept and then solidify it in such a way that it overperforms based on its architecture. So the most classic example of that in an internal shell would be something like a Nico deck. So Nico would be an example of an archetype that whether you go for the racial style of deck, in that case birds, or you go for Nico auto level, those are two styles of decks you can go for with Nico. And depending on how you build it, it's either going to be a complete meme that is absolutely useless, or it could actually be a substantial powerhouse. So the deck that was of most interest to me was birds, and it took me 3 separate iterations of birds to find a construction that I felt was the most powerful. This deck now basically only loses to very specific gimmicks, which again is kind of just me in general. Most people who kind of come up against me will be piloting something very, very gimmicky, something like a 2020 Overwhelm unit, an all elusive deck, because if they try to take me up in like a straightforward LOR match, they will lose even to birds. Like even to a deck like this, my piloting level is like so far beyond what the average Eternal player can bring to the table that they have to come up with something that is like basically, okay, I can't deal with that with this deck. Like it's just like a hard tech kind of thing where it's like, do you have the Vengeance, do you have the Hush? So like a She Who Wanders deck, or any other creature that can present similar overwhelm damage as an example. Hush, and then Elusives being very similar. But let's go over the deck. So the initial construction of birds was exceptionally gimmicky. It was a deck that didn't really know what it was doing. It ran cards like Jarvan 4, even though it wasn't a deck that particularly benefited from Jarvan 4. If you think of something like Eloy Jarvan or Shen Jarvan, those are decks that benefit greatly from the addition of this card. Tentacles, because it's very likely the opponent will have to chump your Tentacle, which means Jarvan is auto-leveling. And Shen, because Jarvan has Barrier. In a deck like this, Jarvan is doing nothing. So Jarvan was a very easy, quick cut. The other card was Quinn. Quinn was typically run in this deck, and the justification there was, well, she summons a bird, therefore she goes in the bird deck. But again, Quinn that cannot level and is not in a shell where she supported to level should not be in a deck, right? If she's not in a scout shell, if she's not in a rally based shell, if she's not in a not being run with Cataclysm and then that's kind of like a rally effect. If she's not doing something like that, then there's no reason to run Quinn. So Quinn was an easy cut. So again, we're taking out the meme champions in the deck, and we're providing the good champions instead. So Garen has long been an elite card, elite being the OG racial Demacia deck. There's no reason why you can't just run him in birds. There's nothing about the way that he levels off of 2 strikes or buffs all your units that is specific to an elite deck. Therefore, he fits in just as well into a bird deck. So that's the first step for upgrading a meme deck, is take a look at the champions and make sure that the champions need to be there. In this specific case, we are cutting down the number of champions from 6 to 4, and we're changing Quinn to Garen. Other things, looking at, I've mentioned this before, talking about cards that are not standard legal and including them in Eternal. Things like Stygian Onlooker. Stygian Onlooker is, for 1 mana, the biggest bird you can get. And the fact that it's a Nightfall card doesn't matter. The other card being Sharpsight. I mentioned Elusives being one weakness to this deck. We need Sharpsight to block Elusives. along with Omen Hawk, and then things like Talon Strike. The only thing we can't deal with is like a 2020 meme overwhelm unit, because again, this deck just doesn't have vengeances or hushes. Like there are certain things that as a player you just like, okay, well I guess I just auto lose. But again, that's casual ladder stuff. It's not like ranked ladder stuff most of the time. Form up, of course, amazing Demacia Trick, Solari Sunhawk, amazing card. These things were all included. Things that weren't included in the list, Omen Hawk. Omen Hawk being a 1-mana buff all your units, bird. Snow Dog being a buff all your units, dog. Again, very important that all of these units have a sub-archetype. Vanguard Sergeant is an elite that, you know, buffs all your units with 4 Demacia. Swift Wing Flight being a bird that summons more birds, that also buffs all your birds. Royal Shimmer Wing being a bird that buffs all your birds. Talon Strike being a strike that buffs all your birds. So you're seeing a very clear pattern here. Then finally we have Ferocious Fluffs, which is a bird that buffs all other subtypes. So this is, again, not specific to birds. So it does in fact buff Garen. It does in fact buff Vanguard Sergeant. It buffs Doggo. So it means that, you know, we're able to run some of these better elite cards in our bird package along with the things that make the bird package good to make the best possible meme deck we can. So we take the meme and we turn it into something that is actually mildly competitive by taking the strongest elements of elites and combining them with the strongest elements of birds to create a deck that has some actual backbone to it, along with the deck buff package that you would normally find in Freljord. And in fact, if you want to run, okay, you can't run any more of the buff package because we're not in Freljord. So yeah, that's about it. You can run Omen Hawk and you run Snow Dog. There's no more deck buffing that can happen beyond that. But that is, you know, that's kind of the basic idea for how you take a meme and you make it playable. And I've got countless examples of how I've done this for other archetypes as well. One of them was Bandle City Scion. So Bandle City has a lot of really cool discard synergy that you just don't see. So things like Returnal Wrench. When I'm discarded, equip me to a random unequipped ally. And then presumably when the ally dies, you get Returnal Wrench back, which means you can discard it again. It's infinite discard fodder. So that allows you to essentially summon an infinite number of Mechaeordles. You'll never run out of discard fodder, like ever. Whirling Death, Staple Strike card, Mecha Pulverizer being the other discard synergy, so you don't have to get excited, but you can potentially make your Scion bigger for 3 damage with something like a Mecha Pulverizer. So, you know, you're taking these memes, you're making them a little bit stronger. You're making them a little more substantial. Generous Gemcrafter, right? So this is, you know, a meme deck that, you know, basically buffs your hand units. But through, you know, the inclusion of certain synergies, specifically Sacrificial Scholar, allowing you to dump spells into him. When he dies, you get all the spells back. Therefore, all your gems, all your sharp sights, all that stuff comes back, and then you can dump it again. And that means you're getting double Generous Gemcrafter value, which is really the true goal of this deck. We can, you know, buff Wounded White Flame on board, or we can buff Wounded White Flame in hand. Either way, it's getting perma-buffed. That's very powerful. So, you know, we basically took that, you know, mono Targon style of Pantheon Taric deck that has no teeth, and we made it have some teeth, regardless of hand state. Thanks to Generous Gemcrafter and the synergies there. Other memes, last video I already talked about Vayne Ornn. So we took a meme card like Blood Harpy and we made it viable. So I won't go through that one again. PNZ. So again, I see people struggling a lot with Undir. My biggest, you know, inclusion for Undir was simply stuff like Mystic Shot, Ballistic Bot, and Victor, giving you other large bodies that you can potentially, you know, the Victor and the Ballistic Bot, essentially being very large bodies that you can also dump stance swaps into if you need to, instead of just having like Bladebound Berserker and then Undir and that's it. And that can make the deck still, even with the new card, the deck can feel a little fragile. If your Undir just gets snap removed and then you have like one Bladebound Berserker in hand and then you just click concede, and like that's not great. So having a few other things in the deck for reactivity, easy Mystic Shot as a 3 of, Ballistic Bot being a big body as well to dump stance swaps into, makes this deck slightly more durable. Support decks, picks. You want to talk about the biggest meme ever. I have played this deck to like 5-game win streaks. You want to talk about the most memey aggro deck that can exist? I started the support, revitalization movement, and it was with Noxus Ionia, taking advantage of things like Crimson Pigeon, Flower Child, and Pix, providing a very aggressive line. And in fact, Pix is a great blocker. He's like a mini Shen. Herald of the Springs is providing the deck some lifesteal, Legion Drummer providing things quick attack, Young Witch providing things quick attack, and then your normal like auto level Lulu stuff plus the Shen. And then the top end I was using Kato, because Kato would allow something like a Flower Child to hit with overwhelm damage and be big and help you kind of push out games. So in every single instance, I'm looking at the concept for the deck and I'm thinking, how can I make it better? Where is the win? And not just like gimmicky stuff, not like, I'm all in on She Who Wanders, which is like a thing, right? In a no vengeance meta, and if no vengeance meta, She Who Wanders is going to be amazing. I always get confused, but it's not She Who Wanders. It's the Overwhelm unit in Freljord that is the top meta deck right now. They Who Endure. So again, They Who Endure being a card that is very, very easy to answer, but when you include Eddy with it, there's a chance that it gets deathless, and that's how that deck has decided to become more durable. Or you give it Challenger, and that ensures that you can challenge the smallest unit, and just like, it's gimmicky, it's dumb, but like, you can see that even in that instance, the deck builder has thought, well, They Who Endure is a bit of a meme right now. What ends up by AGM? One copy of Eddy, and all of a sudden the deck's just inherently better. So they've given it some thought to make the deck, more than just like a standard card pile. And then even in Targon, Targon has its own super meme card, which is Xolani, right? So like, if you want to run like Eddy card pile Xolani, like go for it. There's very few reasons why I think you can't do that. Just run the one Eddy. Run the 3 of a Xolani, and then run a bunch of one drops in a buff package, and maybe Winding Light as well to potentially buff the 1 drops. But like, really, you just need the Xolani with the Deathless, and that's kind of autopiloting the deck for you. Some of these things are meta dependent. So when something gets stronger, namely, let's say big overwhelm units. Like, let's say every deck in Eternal was just big overwhelm units. Other things will inevitably rise up to potentially deal with them, whether it is, the Disintegrates, 1 mana plus 2 mana, free Disintegrate, all of a sudden starting to look a lot better in the meta. Those answers will start to be forthcoming. Hard run silences and hushes and bounces and stuns from Ionia, all of a sudden looking much, much better into things like this. So, you do have to be a little careful with these kind of one-note win cons, in my opinion. Obviously, adding Eddy, making them much better, because all of a sudden your one-note win con is just a little bit stronger. But it's still a gimmick, right? It is still a gimmick at the end of the day. I would much prefer a solid mid-range shell and package that can basically beat every single other solid mid-range package that exists without gimmicks and just kind of straight up value of trading. And this will beat most decks I can think of in the meta that aren't all in on a one gimmick solution for win cons. This deck will defeat that. And I know that because I've run countless games with this list. And I've run countless games with my other meme decks as well. They are flexible, they are well built, they often level champions, and they are doing what they're doing optimally, and they're doing it exceptionally well. But yes, the way most people will play Eternal is that they play it like standard, and they will take basically a bunch of non-committal units, trade them in a non-committal fashion, play their wincon. And that is a style of deck that exists in this format. I don't necessarily think that it is the best style of deck. I think there are enough answers and enough deck constructions to deal with that. And like at the end of the day, this is just the word of a top 100 player on aggro who was more than happy to just like steamroll absolutely every single player at a massive win rate with just like 3-1 drops by turn 2. Like, you know, 3-1 drops by turn 2, Poppy on 4, and I was just like beating the bricks off everybody. And absolutely everybody. So like as much as, you know, going in for gimmicks like She Who Wanders, or not She Who Wanders. She Who Wanders is a ramp wincon, and I respect She Who Wanders as a card. I keep forgetting the name of the damn card because it's so forgettable, but it is the big overwhelm unit. So it's the failure, you know, They Who Endure, Xolani stuff. These big kind of overwhelm gimmicks. I think that proper piloting and proper deck construction is always going to beat out something like the gimmicks, right? The gimmick decks are there. If you need to play the They Who Endure deck to win at a positive win rate in you know, kind of like masters level play, go for it. I'm not going to, you know, besmirch you for doing so. I just don't think it's necessary as you get more comfortable with the format. I don't think you'll need the They Who Endure. I don't think you'll need the Xolani. You know, I don't think you'll need the elusive spam quite as much as you feel more powerful and more comfortable with the format and more unstoppable as a top level Eternal player. That's it for today's discussion. Hope you found it interesting. This is Eternal King signing out.